We welcome you in, everybody, to Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond as 2019 is off to a rip-roaring start here in Philadelphia on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, and also broadcasting to you on KDKA in Pittsburgh as we cover the state with the mission that started in 2018 and continues into 2019. It's all about the law. It's all about educating the listening audience, and our two platforms in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh combine for a big audience, Sam, and it really gives you an opportunity to cover the spectrum and cover the gamut on educating the public. We begin our broadcast today with our Pond Lehocky headline. Pond Lehocky applauding the official partners, the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see how everything plays out today or tonight. But in the interim, we've made it to this point. All good stuff. Welcome to you.
Well, thank you, Joe, and really looking forward to 2019 and carrying out our mission. I'm telling you, the show to kick off 2019 is going to be a great show because we're talking about something that most Americans deal with, and that's real property. That's real estate. So we're going to get into that. Look, our listeners have something in common across the two listening audiences of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And I'm going to direct this exactly to the two listeners that are listening tonight at 6 p.m. on a Sunday when the Philadelphia Eagles are playing the Saints in New Orleans. And those two listeners are Dallas fans. And Philadelphia Eagles fans and Pittsburgh Steelers fans can agree on one thing. We hate Dallas Cowboys fans.
All right, we'll take that.
Here we go. You know, it's really, just to have a lighthearted moment to kick off the 2019. And, our firm is really honored, and we're talking to the Pittsburgh Steelers as well about working with them. We're honored to be an official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. But what grit, miracles. We can talk about so much and be inspired about what is possible. This team has shown that nothing is impossible, Joe Doc. 4-6 with the lineup ahead that was really difficult. How about the trench warfare? The trench warfare on the offensive and defensive lines, and we have a trial lawyer today with us, reminds me of grinding it out in the courtroom, in litigation, knocking them down, fighting them. And I'm going to tell you what, this team is making us all proud. And guess what? They're in New Orleans. And on January 8th, back in 1814, there was the Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson. And you know what it was called after that battle where they beat the British back in the War of 1812? They called that the Miracle of New Orleans. The Miracle of New Orleans that's happening now is going to happen as we speak down in New Orleans for our great team. So anyway, I'm Joe Kraus. I'm really excited about what's going on. We have to do this show and have a couple Dallas Cowboys fans listening to us too in the area. Our friends in the western part of the state are out there listening to us. Our friends in West Virginia are listening to us, in Ohio. And we know the New Jersey fans are glued to the TV. But we're gonna really talk about something important today, and it's really, really exciting to kick off a new year.
When we come back after our first commercial break here on Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond, we'll introduce you to Ken Fleisher. Who is he? What's he all about? We'll tell you and talk about his 37 years of practicing law here on Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond, and to all of our listeners on KDKA in Pittsburgh who have celebrated 6 Super Bowls. We find ourselves on the doorstep here in Philadelphia of perhaps...
Joe, I'm going to tell you, I forgot to mention that. The Steelers are first of all, the ultimate 6 Super Bowls. No other NFL team. I'm just going to add a little bit here and take a little liberty.
Okay, no, it's your show, man. It's your show.
And the only team to do it twice, to have consecutive Super Bowl wins, and maybe we'll have a second team in Pennsylvania
back-to-back.
That has back-to-back. But hats off to the Pittsburgh Steelers as well.
Good stuff. 75, 76, 79, and 80. Hopefully here in Philadelphia it will be 18 and 19. We'll get to a commercial break on Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond. Back in a moment.
Veterans Stadium. The glistening new home of the Eagles was an optimistic sight for Philadelphia fans as 1971 began.
in the face of the man they call Jones.
10-6 last year. I got a good feeling. This is our year.
Throw 2 Hail Marys. Down the middle of the field, the pass is picked off by Harrison.
Launching one for the end zone. It's a jump ball and it's incomplete. And Gronk was there. And time runs out.
This is the end of the game.
And for the Philadelphia Eagles, the long drought is over. Finally.
Go Birds from Pond Lee Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
If you want to talk with Sam Pond or any one of his legal experts, call 800-568-7500. That's 800-568-7500.
And welcome back, everyone, to Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond as we kick off 2019 in Philadelphia on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT, and in Pittsburgh on the world's first radio station, KDKA, along with our host Sam Pond and J-Doc, I'm Joe Kraus, kicking off with the listening audience 2019. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, we want to talk about something that's probably most Americans are affected by, well, I would say almost universally, that you have to deal in some context with real estate law, whether even if you're not buying a piece of real property, a piece of real estate, you're going to have to lease somewhere to live. So we have Ken Fleisher. I've known Ken for many, many years. He's at the law firm of Zarwin and Baum. Know the folks over at Zarwin and Baum. Great lawyers. Known them for a long time. Just do excellent work. True professionals. And Ken, just tell us about the firm a little bit and what your practice is about.
Gladly. Thanks, Sam. I am the head of the real estate and financial services department at the firm. I've been with the firm now, partnered there for about 25 years. The firm itself has been around since the early 1960s, and for many, many years was a small boutique firm doing a lot of business and business litigation. When I joined, there were about 15 lawyers. We are now up to somewhere around 70 attorneys, and we have offices in Philadelphia, which is our main office. We also have offices in New Jersey, one in North Jersey, one in South Jersey. We have an office out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we have an office in Delaware. So we run the tri-state area, and most of our practice is in the tri-state area, although my practice, being real estate, takes me all over the country, depending on who my clients are. So although I'm based here in Philadelphia, I often work with clients and with property all over. Just yesterday, in fact, I closed the sale of a commercial property up in Brockton, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston. Sure. Many people know of Brockton as the
boxer.
Yep, the home of two great boxers, sure. Marvin Hagler and Rocky Marciano. So the nature of my practice takes me all over the country, depending on what I'm doing, who I'm representing, and what the property is. Well,
our listeners could be anybody from someone that may be thinking about buying, the first home, or even buying another home or a secondary home, a vacation home. We could have people listening today that are, moving into Old City and leasing an apartment. Or we could have someone that's going out and, such as we do as lawyers with my firm, because we have to have commercial leases. And I never do anything, by the way, Ken, without having you or your firm or someone else review any documentation I have in regard. Even though I'm a lawyer, I clearly go get counsel in regard to any real estate transaction that I may do, whether it's leasing this office space or buying a piece of real estate or looking into something to develop. We want to cover, there's so much to cover. Let's start out with just someone going to go ahead and buy a row home in Northeast or a place downtown Pittsburgh. What do they, or condo? What should they be concerned about?
Well, first I appreciate you're saying that even as an attorney, you go to outside counsel to work with you when you are buying or leasing or doing anything with real estate. Law today is by its nature so specialized that if you are a workers' comp attorney or a litigation attorney, commercial attorney such as yourself, you may not be immediately familiar with everything that happens in the world of real estate. And it's just like if you were a doctor. People deal more with doctors maybe on a day-to-day basis, but you're not going to go to a dermatologist if you have a heart problem, even though they both went to medical school. So same thing in the law. And when you say you're going to buy or lease a residence, the other thing you have to understand as the person who is on the buying end or the leasing end, this is probably going to be the largest monetary investment you make at any time in your life. When you buy a house or when you lease a property for a length of time, you're making a tremendous and long-term financial commitment. So it behooves you, it's important for you to understand what you're getting into. And there are many, many different aspects of law in addition to the business side which will inform that decision and how you go about making it. If you're buying a house, there's an old saying that the three most important things in real estate are location, location, and location. So the first thing you need to do is determine where do you want to live and why. That's not something that a lawyer can literally help you with, but a lawyer can guide you in saying, what are your goals? Are you going to live close to your work? Are you going to live close to a means of transportation? If you travel a lot, do you want to be within 15 minutes of a train station? Do you want to be within 15 minutes of an airport? A good lawyer is going to know something about the locations in the area where you are seeking to buy or lease property, so he or she can advise you as to what you can expect relative to living in that location. Are you close to transit? Are you close to commercial areas? Are you within a residential area or otherwise?
And making those decisions, we talk about on the show that we have to understand that the purpose of this show is for people to understand about the law, because quite frankly, if you don't know about the law, you're kind of a lamb to the slaughter often.
Very much.
And what's important that people have to understand that we have a federal body of law, we have a state body of law, we have a municipal body of law, we have county laws. So when you decide where you're going to buy, it has a ramification in regard to what the law says. In other words, how you file something. What is the process? What are the taxes? Is there a tax abatement? Those type of issues that are different in every county and every municipality. Is that how it is?
Very much so. And in fact, it's more not just the counties and the municipalities, it's also where you're buying, and is your property a new property? Is it just been built? If it's just been built, is there a tax abatement available? For example, in Philadelphia, many years ago, about 12 or 15 years ago, because the city wanted to encourage residential development, the city instituted a tax abatement program for new construction or for substantial renovations of existing property. And the short version of it is that if you qualify for that tax abatement, then the value of the improvements you make to that property don't get taxed for a period of 10 years. That's the short form of it. That encouraged tremendous explosion of development in areas of Philadelphia which were previously underserved by residential property. And because of that, people have moved back into the city. And there have been a tremendous renaissance of various areas in the city. So when you're looking for a property, of course you want to find out what it's going to cost you to own it. What's the insurance going to be? What are the taxes going to be? What's your mortgage going to be? Buying a property involves going to a bank most of the time. Most people can't afford to pay cash for a property, so they go to a bank and they get a mortgage. What are mortgage rates? Do you want a variable rate mortgage? Do you want a fixed rate mortgage? Do you make that decision based on how long you think you're going to be located at that property? Are you moving there because you have 2 kids and you're going to be there for 15 years? What are the schools like in the area? What are your school taxes? Or are you moving there for 3 or 5 years and you bounce around the country because of your job? What are the transaction costs? Transfer taxes are something that you have to take into account when you're buying property.
Joe Doc has a question. I want to get back to the tax issue after Joe Doc's question.
Yeah, so Ken, Sam, you started by talking about individuals who are buying houses, young people. And many times, Ken, you're dealing with, just the real estate agent, maybe the broker, but, an insurance agent. When you're a lot of people don't have the opportunity or don't know to get a lawyer involved. They're just dealing with these other individuals. Subsequently, you get the settlement. You have all these papers, and I'm just talking about, people like myself, a layman, and all of a sudden your broker is going through everything. You're doing the transaction at the table, but you don't really know what you're reading.
Right.
At what point should somebody consider getting a real estate lawyer involved so they can be counseled on not only the things you're talking about, but the actual paperwork, where you talk about the plot lines, somebody reviewing the documents, all those things.
Right. What you want to do is get your lawyer involved right at the beginning, because any real estate transaction, any contract you get into law is going to be based on a written contract, and everything that follows from that contract is based on the terms of that contract. Your price, the location of the property, the quality of the title of the property you're going to buy, what your financing rights are, a mortgage contingency, all of that's going to be in a real estate contract. And unlike many other contracts in the real estate, in the legal world, real estate contracts virtually always have to be in writing. If it's not in writing, it doesn't count. And by the way, as an attorney, I always tell my clients, if it's not in writing, you're probably going to forget what you said anyway, so put it in writing, put it on paper. The most important document in a real estate transaction is the very first one, your agreement of sale or your lease. So even if a broker, and brokers are trained and brokers are professionals, but brokers are not necessarily lawyers. They have your best interests in mind for what they want to do, but they do not and should not participate in negotiating the ins and outs of an agreement or a lease.
Yeah, they don't have a license to practice law, and therefore they can't give legal counsel, even though you may be somewhat thinking that's happening. You can't. Let's get back, when we come back from the break, to really get into, I think Joe Doc led us off to kind of how the process works. We started the process. Very, very important to understand, listeners, that if you're going to go to settlement on a property and you have the agreement of sale, and if you have a lawyer there, the lawyer is going to say, hey, any kind of side deal that we're talking about, it has to be in writing. It has to be in that document. It has no legal effect to say, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll help that, I'll fix the roof later. That's not going to work. Joe Doc, I know you have a question.
Well, you said earlier in the show that in other areas of the law.
Right. But we're going to come back and pick this up. Thank you.
That's good.
This is Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond. Pond Lehockey's pleased to announce that disability justice is now Pond Lehockey Stern Giordano Disability, offering the same exceptional service under a new name. Legal Eagles Radio will continue with Ken Fleisher, our real estate attorney expert, here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT and in Pittsburgh on KDKA.
Now back to Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond. Talk Radio 1210 WPHT.
And don't forget, everybody, about the Legal Eagles Radio hotline. You can connect with Sam directly. 1-800-723-8715. 1-800-723-8715. That number is hot. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Thanks, Joe. Ken, let's get back. Let's really just give the folks a flavor for, as we call hypothetical, but a real-life situation. So I'm going to buy my first house. My wife and I, we have a little baby. We're looking at the school district. We like the school district. We like the location. We've got a real estate agent. We want to make an offer in a house. What happens next? If I wanted to have legal representation to guide me and protect me through this.
Well, the first thing that happens is you're going to negotiate the agreement of sale to buy the house. And in Pennsylvania, there is a fairly standard form, which is created by the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. That is a standard form of contract which is presented in most cases for resales of residential property. When I say a resale, I mean you're not buying it from the builder. There are different kinds of contracts, and we can get into that when you're buying from a builder. But if you're buying from another owner and there's a broker involved, most of the time the broker will use or present to you for signature and negotiation a Pennsylvania Association of Realtors form agreement of sale. That's true in other states as well, too. Other states have their own standard forms. Now, it's interesting. When you look at that form, you think it's printed on a piece of paper. It must be perfect. It must be what everybody signs. It must be right for the situation. I will say that I think it's an outstanding form. I think it's a very good starting place for most things. I think the Pennsylvania Board of Realtors and its in-house attorneys have done a very good job covering many areas of law that are pertinent in Pennsylvania. But there are always things that you need to tailor to your particular situation. So when you're looking at an agreement, if you took that agreement and it's pre-printed on a form and you put it onto 8.5 by 11 paper, the usual size paper that you use in writing any kind of contract, and you printed it out, it's a long contract. It has a lot of terms. It has a lot of very specific issues that it covers: environmental issues, title issues, survey, financing contingencies. What kind of deed are you going to use? Are there mineral rights involved? If you're in western Pennsylvania or central Pennsylvania or upstate, as opposed to the Philadelphia area, many, many times you have properties where there may be oil and gas leases or other kinds of mineral right leases that affect the property you're going to buy. That's when you need a title company. So the first thing you do is you get that agreement of sale, you read through it thoroughly, and then you make sure that it outlines properly all of the things you need as a buyer of real estate. And by the way, also as a seller of real estate. Attorneys can represent both sides. I represent sellers as much as I represent buyers. Buyers want to make sure that, number one, the price is right. Make sure that everything is filled in correctly so you know what you're buying, you know how much you're paying for it, and you know when that money is due. Most of the time, when you sign an agreement of sale, you make a down payment. Who holds that down payment? Very important question. Will the title company hold it? Will the buyer's attorney hold it? Who holds the escrow money,
will
the
it
good
earn
faith
interest?
money? Will it earn interest? Will it not earn interest? How long will it take before you go to closing? Sometimes you don't bother with interest because it may not be worth going through the rigmarole of putting it into an interest-bearing account where you have to get a 1099 for tax purposes. And even if you put it into an interest-bearing account, these days, with interest rates being so low, if you put a $50,000 deposit in escrow for 3 months, you're going to get $12.27 of interest. It's really not worth it. So you have to set that up properly. You have to make sure there's a mortgage contingency if you're a buyer and you're not a cash buyer.
And what's that mean, a mortgage contingency?
A mortgage contingency is essentially a clause in an agreement of sale which says that if the buyer does not qualify for a mortgage of a certain dollar amount at a certain percentage rate of interest on or before a certain date before closing, then the buyer has the right to opt out of the contract.
And that's why I would assume that sellers like cash deals or, not a mortgage contingency that they can get the deal done. Is it
Sure.
Generally speaking?
Sure. The fewer the contingencies in any agreement, whether it's for residential property or commercial property, the better off the seller is. The seller wants to have as few contingencies to the buyer's obligation to purchase as are possible. That being said, it is very common that, especially in residential deals, there's a mortgage contingency because most people can't just write a check for $200,000 or $1 million or whatever the price of the house is. In commercial transactions, for the commercial audience, you will quite often see that commercial deals have no mortgage contingency, even if the price is very, very high. I'm looking outside the window of your beautiful office, and I'm looking at a number of buildings that have been developed in the western half of Center City in Philadelphia. My firm and I have been involved with some of those projects. Buying and selling deals like that, you may think, well, it's $100 million to buy that building, and there's no mortgage contingency. Well, there are buyers out there who can do it, because either they know they have the financing in advance or they have the cash in advance. But when you're buying a house, that's not very common.
When's the deal done? In other words, if I have you and I'm buying my first home or a home, doesn't really matter, and we'll get into new construction, we'll get into condos and those type of issues. But I'm buying my first place. I go and I say to you, here's the agreement of sale. We want to put in some particulars. It's a lot of it's form. I sign it. When's the deal final? Is it done when I sign the agreement and the seller signs the agreement? Is that a final deal, or is that a settlement? Is there something called title? What's title mean? There's a title search. Do we have to have good title? In other words, what does all that mean?
What's the process?
What's the process?
Well, the process first is to sign the agreement of sale. Once you sign the agreement of sale, then the buyer does actually have a legally enforceable interest in that property. The seller can't go out and sign another agreement of sale with another buyer which, by the way, in my practice, I've seen happen on more than one occasion. There is something out there called fraud.
Yes.
But I'm assuming that this listening audience is not going to go commit fraud.
But hopefully they don't run the fraud and they're aware of it as well.
They have to be aware of it, and that's why you get a title search. One of the first things a buyer does after an agreement of sale is signed is a buyer will go to a title insurance company, which are licensed insurance companies in every different state. Some of them are national, but they are licensed in the states where the property is located, and they will order a title search on the property. What that means is you need to find out that the person who sells you this property is giving you what in the legal world is called good and marketable title. Without going into great deal, what it means is you want to make sure when you buy that property that nobody else has any rights to it. If the seller of that property has a mortgage on it, the seller has to pay off its mortgage company, and the mortgage company has to release its mortgage before you as a buyer take title. Otherwise, somebody else has a lien on your property. The title search will tell you who has liens on that property. It will tell you who has easements. Easements are rights of people to use but not occupy adjacent real estate. And also, easements afford utility companies the right to serve your property. Virtually every property in Pennsylvania and other states is going to have some utility easement on it. You don't want to buy a property where you can't turn on the lights.
So you really want to make sure that you have a clean title.
Correct.
In other words, you're now getting that property, understanding the easements. In other words, having someone else be able to come onto your property for purposes of serving a power line or getting through it to another piece of property. Also understanding that if you got that piece of property, you're not going to have these liens, these judgments. In other words, people have said, hey, I've got an interest in that property. I've got a money interest in that property. You don't want to take that on and have to deal with their money interest.
Absolutely.
So you have to have that clean transfer. Joe Doc?
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to Ken, and there's so much information.
Oh, this is like a 5-hour show.
But it is, and we're right now on residential.
Jenna, every show is a 5-hour show. She's sitting over there. She knows me. Look, we have our intern over there. She's not even an intern. She's a full-time employee, but is here at every show. And I always say we need a 5-hour show about every show.
It's true, though.
It's so true, though.
100%, because so I'm listening to Ken, and the first thing I'm saying is, I mean, how many times have I left a settlement or a closing and going, what did I just sign? Right? Okay, yeah. And Ken, you're going through a bunch of things that somebody has to look out for, and not to mention all those documents. You mentioned 25% of homeowners utilize, roughly in that area, an attorney at settlement.
Yeah, when we were talking offline, my guess is, just based on anecdotal experience in the business for over 35 years, that most people don't hire an attorney when they're just buying a house.
Do you find that absolutely incredible because they really don't know what they're signing?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to understand why somebody would commit the kind of money that's necessary to buy a property unless that person is making sure that what they're buying is exactly what they think they're paying for.
Well, you said it at the top of the show, Ken. This is probably the biggest monetary purchase that most American citizens are going to deal with.
No question.
And to not pay an attorney, which is a fraction or a minuscule amount compared to the value of your asset.
Why don't the brokers recommend it?
Well, by the way, Joe, this is again getting out in front of something and investing. This is insurance, because guess what? If you have a dispute and you didn't have an attorney look at it and you're not protected, and then you get into litigation over that issue, have to go into court, it's going to cost you 5 or 10 times more by not having the precaution of getting an attorney early on. And guess what? Because you didn't have an attorney, you probably don't have a good case when you have to sue someone over a contract that you didn't have an attorney look at. Mm-hmm. So anyway, let's get into the more of the discussion when we come back. This is an excellent discussion.
Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond here on Talk Radio 1210, WPHT in Pittsburgh, on KDKA with our real estate expert, Ken Fleisher. Back in a moment.
Veterans Stadium. The glistening new home of the Eagles was an optimistic sight for Philadelphia fans as 1971 began.
And Rod Martin once again slams the door in the face of the man they call Jones.
10-6 last year. I got a good feeling this is our year.
They're going to throw two Hail Marys. Down the middle of the field, the pass is picked off by Harrison.
Launching one for the end zone. It's a jump ball and it's incomplete. And Gronk was there. And time runs out.
This is the end of the game.
And for the Philadelphia Eagles, the long drought is over. Finally.
Go Birds! From Pond Lehocky, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Talk Radio 1210, WPHT, Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond.
And in Pittsburgh, Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond comes to you via KDKA. Thank you so much for being a part of our listening audience across the state of Pennsylvania. A couple of quick programming reminders for you. Pay attention over the next couple of weeks for a couple of big announcements. We'll be on location live down in South Philadelphia with a real interactive special from down at Chicky and Pete's. Details to follow. In Pittsburgh in the month of February, we'll be in town and bring you a 2-hour special from the great Steel City. Look forward to that. More details on the date for that, Sam, in February.
Yeah, I can't believe, Joe, that we've waited this long to have a real estate program because this is really good stuff.
Really good stuff. Great stuff from Ken Fleisher.
Yeah, really great stuff. So, Ken, let's get in. Let's kind of continue a discussion. And Joe Doc reminded me, and I think, as always, his advice in directing the conversation is always spot on. Let's continue the discussion in the residential context of, one of our listeners going in and buying a house. So they sign the contract. What happens between the time that they sign the contract and the time that they go, what we call, to settlement?
Right.
And what does all that mean?
Sure. There's a journey from the time you sign the contract to the time you get the deed. The deed is the instrument in Pennsylvania or in any other state which conveys the title from the buyer, from the seller to the buyer. And different states have different kinds of deeds. In Pennsylvania, we use most often what's called a special warranty deed, which means that the seller is telling you that the seller has done nothing during its term of ownership which would change the title to something which is not marketable. Does something to affect the title. Basically the seller is warranting what happens during the seller's period of ownership. Other kinds of deeds, which are common in other states, are called general warranty deeds, where the seller is warranting everything that's ever happened to that property title-wise going back to day one, before that seller even owned it. And again, different states have different protocols, different traditions, different title insurance rules, which inform what kind of deed you use. But in Pennsylvania, it's usually a special warranty deed. After you sign the agreement of sale, as I started to say earlier, you immediately, if you're smart, are going to go get a title search done and make sure that when you go to closing, when you get the deed, you get a title insurance policy, just as you have to go get a fire insurance policy on that property. You need a homeowner's policy of insurance. You have to go to your agent. You have to have the agent price the insurance and make sure that when you go to closing, which is when you get the deed and you pay the purchase price to the seller, that you have title insurance, which says that you have the right quality of title to that property, that the title that's called for by the agreement of sale, which your attorney should have negotiated, and that you also have real estate insurance. Some of the other things, you have to make sure you have a mortgage.
Let me stop on the title insurance. So
sure.
You could get a title by a title company doing a search of ownership and whether or not there's any liens or any other possible encumbrances on that. And that generally is going to be a good warranty of what the title is, good and clean, but it may not be. So you
Correct.
get the title insurance to protect you. Is that what that's about?
That is correct. You when you sign an agreement of sale, as I said earlier, you want to make sure you get clear, good, and marketable title, that nobody else has any rights to that real estate, financial rights, occupancy rights, possessory rights, title rights, anything else, unless you agree to it. As I said, you'll probably agree that the utility company needs an easement to put the electric on or to make sure you have water and sewer, but you don't want to take title subject to your seller's mortgage to its bank. You have to make sure that's paid off and satisfied, that the title is clear of that. Your title insurance company is going to do those searches of the public records at the county courthouse or wherever the public records are kept, and it will ensure that when you go to closing, your title is the way you want it to be.
And in Philadelphia, we have the Recorder of Deeds office in City Hall. If I bought a property down in Old City or Society Hill, I mean, it could go back to the 18th century. It could go back to colonial times.
Yeah.
So they kept records of all these deeds continuously. Every time it was transferred from one owner to another.
Yes, those records are kept. They may not all be right at City Hall. They may be in city archives, but you can go back very, very far, hundreds of years sometimes, to find out what that title is going back to. William Penn in Philadelphia, and I've seen titles that go back several hundred years. Yes.
Ken, I'm sorry. How often is there an issue, in concerning those things that you're talking about?
Well, more often than you might think. There are often issues not just with the title where you find that there's a mortgage from 1960, from 3 owners ago, and nobody ever bothered to satisfy the mortgage. The mortgage may have been paid off many, many years ago, but when you pay off a mortgage and when you want to do something with title, everything, as I said earlier, in real estate has to be in writing. Mortgages are recorded at the county courthouse or at the county recorder of deeds. When the mortgage is paid off, the mortgage company has to file another piece of paper called a mortgage satisfaction. And the mortgage satisfaction then tells the world that the mortgage has been paid off, and it will no longer be a lien on your title. I can't tell you how many times I see property where there are mortgages from many, many years ago which were obviously paid off, but nobody ever filed a satisfaction. So that mortgage is still sitting on the title. It's still an encumbrance on the title. Your title is not clear. And it can take a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of money to clear off those mortgages. Imagine if the bank no longer exists. I've seen this many times. You see mortgages to banks that went out of business 40 years ago or merged 12 different times and nobody knows where they are anymore. There are ways to deal with it. It takes money. It takes time. So that's why you get title insurance. Well, if it's caught properly, when you do a title search, and your agreement of sale, properly negotiated, says that the seller is required to give you clear title, the seller is obligated to do it.
Well, there's exactly why you want an attorney. You have to negotiate that type of thing. If that's left hanging in the wind, all of a sudden you have this issue that you have to deal with. It's going to put a big stumbling block.
Yeah, and you wouldn't know it unless you had an attorney.
But not only a stumbling block to get the clear title, but also a stumbling block between the parties now as to who's going to pay all this money to clear title. Clearly, a buyer goes in and says, hey, I'm going to buy this property from you, seller. You got to have clear title. But if it's not negotiated, it's not put in the 4 corners of an agreement, you got a problem. You've got something else you have to negotiate. Continue the journey from the time it's signed to going to settlement.
One of the other things that many people do, and I'm starting to recommend it more and more, even in a residential practice, is to get a survey of the property. In New Jersey, it's basically mandatory for title insurance and other purposes that you get a survey of property every time.
Oh boy, this is so important.
Very, very important. I can't tell you. Let's say you have a property in Philadelphia. It's a row house, and you have a row house with a common wall called a party wall, which is a technical term. I don't need to go into the details, but a common wall with your next door neighbor. You have a duplex or a row house. Suppose you did a survey and you find out, well, that wall happens to be 3 inches over the property line because when the property was built, the developer who built that property didn't properly locate the building on the ground. And your wall is either 3 inches on your side of the property line or maybe 3 inches on the other side of the property line. If you get a survey, you're going to be able to find that out. You're going to be able to deal with those issues before you go to closing.
Folks, listen. I want to tell you right now, for one reason and one reason only, that is about, I have seen this time and time again. You know, I have it listed down in my preparatory period of questions to ask, Ken, and one is something called adverse possession.
Right.
And, oh, goodness.
Goodness.
I just had my neighbor come in and say they were clearing the lot between us that is owned by an association. And he had been working on that property and had a fence up on that property. And he had a fence up and had been caring for this property for about 16, 17 years. He thought it was his property. He never did a survey. And all of a sudden, the association came and said, you got to move this fence. I know you put this, the Blessed Mother statue there. You've all got to be cleaned out.
Yep.
And he didn't know because he didn't have a survey. Now,
right.
had he done that, I think, for 21 years in Pennsylvania, that would become his property. So actually, if that was my neighbor and I didn't do a survey and my neighbor was coming in and encroaching and building a driveway there and a basketball court, and we all just naturally thought that was our neighbor's property, Joe Krause, after 21 years, that becomes my neighbor's property. I lost it. It's called adverse possession. Not a real estate lawyer, but I still remember 95 years ago when I took the bar exam, and went to law school. So keep on. We have so much to cover here, Joe Doc.
This happened to my father, by the way, just so you know. I mean, after 20 years living in a house, he found.
It's amazing how often this happens. I have litigated. I not only do have a transactional practice, but I have a business practice that takes me into court every now and then. And I've litigated adverse possession and adverse easement cases all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I have a pretty good body of knowledge on it, which would take another 2 shows. Yeah. But that is a very important issue. So now you're going and you have everything in order and you're ready to go to settlement. And J-Doc, you were asking me about what happens at the settlement. You're presented with a whole bunch of papers. You're presented with the deed. Well, the seller signs the deed. By the way, everything we're talking about here is geared to representing a buyer. But sellers also need attorneys. Sellers have to make sure that the attorneys read the contract to say the seller can represent certain things about the property. What about the environmental condition? Does it have asbestos? Does it have lead paint? Does it have radon? These are all tests that a buyer has to do of the property when you do a property inspection. Buyers should never buy a developed property or even an undeveloped property, raw ground, without doing an inspection of that property. If it's developed, you need an engineer to go in there and make sure that the appliances are in working order, the roof is not about to collapse, that it's structurally sound, and that there aren't any environmental problems. What if there's an oil tank underground and it's leaked? Boy, do you have issues.
We have issues, and you're raising all the reasons why someone has to have an attorney like Ken Fleisher in regard to representing them in regard to real estate. Ken, fascinating conversation. Joe Doc, I know you're chomping with a lot of other questions. We're going to get to you. We're going to have you come back because if you start talking, we're really going to run out of time.
I can't wait till part B of the show.
And thank you, everyone. We're going to see you, and we're going to have another show. Thank you for listening.
That's going to do it for this edition of Legal Eagles Radio with Sam Pond. Our special guest, Ken Fleisher, a real estate attorney with Zarwin, Baum, DeVito, Kaplan, Scher, and Toddy. Well done. Nice job by Ken Fleisher. Everybody listening on KDKA, close your ears for just a moment. Everybody in Philadelphia. And this is for you, J-Doc. We'll end the show tonight with an Eagle chant. Good night, everybody.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and in no way represents the views of WPHT or its management.